The long-awaited white paper on police reform appeared recently, and it sets out some fundamental changes to the way that policing will work in the future. There is an entire section called Unleashing the Power of Our People Through Data and Technology. It sets out how to improve policing's data foundations, and that of course means that everyone in policing needs to know how to manage it. We all know that data has risks when it's not managed well, or where it goes where it shouldn't. You've read the headlines, I'm sure. I'm Catherine Levin, editor of Emergency Services Times, and in this episode of For Every Response, we will hear from Kate Fisher-Stevens. Kate is head of the National Data and Analytics Office, which is part of the National Police Chiefs Council. This is a new role and a new organisation, one that will help to resolve the fragmentation of data in policing. And by that, I mean the problem of having 43 forces, in England and Wales at least, doing things 43 times and 43 different ways. The white paper says that this makes it harder to share, analyse and act on insights. Kate is police staff and proud to be so. She has spent 20 years working in data, with roles in the UK and overseas. She spent a long time at the National Crime Agency. The variety in her career has kept her in love with data, she says. It is logical then that she should take on this national role, the first of its kind in policing. We kick off this conversation by talking about how policing can make sense of all the data it collects.
Yeah, so policing's biggest challenge definitely isn't a lack of data. We have reams of it. But really the challenge is making sense of that data that we already have. And there's probably several kind of long-standing issues that sit alongside that. So fragmentation of data across 43 forces and countless systems. So we know that data is held in multiple systems, different formats, subject to local processes, and that makes it difficult to build a really kind of unified national picture. We know we've got inconsistent data quality, so that records, they can vary between forces. Some of them have got missing fields. Some of it can be a little inconsistent. And obviously it's all based on human input, and humans are not perfect. There's a bit of a limited ability to share and scale insights that results from that. So innovation happens in pockets, and it's different in different systems in different areas. And without those kind of consistent standards across things, it makes it hard to replicate or scale some of the good ideas that are out there in forces. And then there's probably something around, forces really need to use this information even though it's not perfect. So having that kind of inconsistent data picture can present forces with risks to using that data.
Okay, so you come up with quite a few things for me to dig into there. The first one around fragmentation. So we know that there is now going to be a review on the 43 police forces across England and Wales, led by Lord Hogan Howe. Do you think that represents an opportunity for you in terms of dealing with the fragmentation issue? Do you see that the data side of things will benefit should the review conclude that fewer forces are going to be the way forward?
I don't necessarily think the number of forces is kind of material to that. I think it's really about what the National Data and Analytics Office can provide to the whole of policing. So it's about kind of taking that national approach to data. So, things like having national standards and consistency are definitely part of the kind of office remit. We want to make sure that we've got a common approach that improves the trust in our data and reduces some of that variation that I've just talked about. We want to make sure that policing sees data as a strategic asset nationally. So it's not just kind of a technical byproduct. And part of the NDO's job is to kind of build those consistent foundations, reduce any duplication that goes on, and make sure that, I guess, policing can use the data and technology that it has ethically and safely. So force numbers are probably not as relevant as they may seem at first, but definitely it gives us a more limited number of stakeholders to engage with to make sure those standards, the data infrastructure, and that kind of scalable analytical capability for forces is kind of equal across everyone, regardless of size or shape.
Yeah, so I suppose it takes nicely to that sense of what you talked about there about sharing and scaling to get the insights so that you can have the quantity that you need to really understand what's going on. So by doing that within your office, and you talked about the risks. So seeing data as a risk, do you think that those forces, when they're dealing with their data at the local level, think of it as a risk, the data that they hold? Do they believe that it is an asset and has a risk? Do you think they think that actual discussion takes place at force level?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think people see data and the analytical tooling that sits on top of data and the outputs from that as a national asset, and that kind of view is increasing. I think there are two sides of risk to data. So one is kind of, I guess, risk of its use, but the other is risk of not using it. And actually, as I said at the beginning, we've got so much data in policing that actually making sure that's shared appropriately, ethically, and in compliance with our kind of data protection legislation is really, really key to policing having the best view and best picture, I guess, of what's going on. So we definitely don't want to discourage that. We just want to put those things in place so that we know that it's being done in the most appropriate way and at the appropriate points in time.
So that balance between risk of not using it and the risk of using it, knowing when to make that decision and the regulations that sit in that environment. Do you think forces are confident in their use of things like GDPR and to be able to know when and when it's appropriate to use things? Is the knowledge level good within forces?
Yeah, so I think I always look at this in a bit of a tiered approach way. So, and it's kind of common across policing, which is great. So everyone in policing handles information, and understanding that information is part of every role that exists in policing. But I guess the different levels of skills that are required kind of differ depending on who you are and where you work in policing. And that's why, like I say, a tiered approach to ensuring that forces have those kind of specialist analysts and kind of data professionals that are there for that really kind of complex interrogation, understand the legislation really well, can model things and provide really advanced insights are really key. But then you do need to have kind of operational users who have got access to accessible tools. So, all frontline staff should be able to kind of use those insights that those technical specialists produce. And they don't necessarily need specialist training for that, but they do need ongoing CPD to kind of reinforce responsible data use and make sure that, compliance is key to our public trust. So we need to make sure that occurs kind of across the piece. And then it's really about leaders then having the ability to ask the right question. I don't think we necessarily need all our leaders to be kind of data experts or analytical experts, but we do need them to be data literate and aware of what kind of data can and cannot tell them, and be able to understand its limitations and also the context behind any analytical outputs that are based on that data. So I don't think we want to make every officer kind of a data scientist or a data expert, but we do need to kind of make the tools simple and effective, consistent, and make sure they kind of have a national standard so that every officer benefits from them.
You talked about leaders just then, and I'm interested in the role of leaders with data. Do you think that data is something that's talked about at the top level of organisations? Is it simply seen as something in the IT department over there, or is it part of a conversation that's happening at the strategic level?
Yeah, so I think of my policing career, now is the time, senior level, where data is probably discussed the most. Having a sound evidence base for what policing's doing has become increasingly important, and making best use of that data that we have has become increasingly important. But again, I think the perception that data and analytics is only really talked about in kind of DDAT areas or IT departments, I think comes from the fact that, again, from what I've just said, we can't expect all of our senior leaders to be experts in this, and they do rely heavily on those departments in order to guide them in what they do. But I do think kind of senior leaders in policing becoming increasingly data literate. Many are now kind of deeply engaged in kind of data enabled transformation across their forces, and they do recognise that data is a strategic asset. But, as with everything, capability varies across forces. And I think probably one of the key things is those leaders knowing the key questions to ask of their kind of subject matter experts with the technical expertise. And we certainly make this kind of key to our office success, really. We want to be there to support those leaders. We contribute to the executive leadership program in policing so that the people that go on that program have an overview of why data is important, how it can be used, some of the legislation and the ethics that need to be compliant to maintain that public trust. But we also have a people pillar in the office, which looks to build those kind of continuous professional development opportunities across forces. And obviously we provide the kind of standards and guidance and the tooling so that we can help influence that business change and make sure that leaders have the best access to the best data and tooling. So they don't need to be really technologists, I would say, but they do need to be kind of really informed commissioners who understand the assumptions, the limitations and the ethical governance that surrounds kind of data and technology and analytical tooling.
You've mentioned ethics quite a few times in your responses so far, which I'm really pleased to hear. And I often think about ethics and data and in the sort of AI space, but sort of wonder if we could just explore, first of all, what it means to have ethical use of data. I suppose I'm thinking about live facial recognition, where we're continuing to see all of these rollouts happening across England, and about the ethics of that. So I wonder if you could kind of just unpick it a little bit for us. Why is ethics and data important? What difference does it make to the outcomes from the front line?
Yeah, so, I mean, definitely. Ethics is key in policing. It's most definitely not an add-on to what we do. It's kind of foundational to our policing legitimacy and our public trust. So from an office perspective, it really means kind of being lawful, proportionate, and making sure whatever we do is explainable. That's both in the criminal justice system, but also to the public. So data and analytics really should support and not override professional judgment. It's about having an evidence base for what policing is doing. There's a big thing and a big kind of cognizance in policing about making sure we design out bias and any inequality. So we know we've had some historical issues around trust with the public, and we have to ensure that no unintended harm arises from any new technology or any data we use. So that's really key and really at the forefront of policing's mind. We need to be transparent with the public. So we need to be really clear about the tools we're using, why they're being used, and how their impact is being measured. And that kind of links to kind of having clear accountability, I guess, so that every system or model has a kind of identified owner and an oversight process so that those continuous checks and balances are in place. And then really, I mean, it all comes down to kind of embedding consent and legitimacy with the public. So ethics for us is about maintaining trust, and the trust that we have depends on fairness, transparency, and really meaningful engagement with the public. So as part of our role in the NDAO, we work really closely with forces to kind of embed that ethical thinking at every stage and make sure that it's a continuous process and not just a kind of a checkbox or a checkpoint.
Yes, and I wonder if by making it a continuous process, it becomes part of the DNA, because ethics and certainly this trust and confidence concept comes up all the time in policing, but to see it embedded in the concept around data shows that it's in every element of law enforcement. Just in terms of the designing out bias side of things, what does that mean? I've heard that phrase before, but why an ethics and bias kind of get brought together in the same sentence? I just wonder if you could help explain what that means to design it out.
Yeah, so for me, it's about understanding, it all comes back to understanding our data really. And it's kind of the point I made at the beginning. So our data is based on human processing largely, and it's collected from the public. If we have gaps in that data, then any tooling we put on top of that can exacerbate, particular, I guess it's about, exacerbating particular perceptions. So, for example, if you're collecting a range of data and actually some of the key elements of that is missing, it's going to give you a skewed picture in how that data represents in an analytical product. And what we want to do is avoid any kind of inherent bias that may exist in that data. So it's really about understanding the gaps, understanding what you're getting from your data. Sometimes it's about accepting those gaps and being transparent about them. And I think in policing, ethics and bias are linked because we want to make sure that every member of the public is treated fairly.
And you talk about gaps. So I wondered, that leads me to talk to you about a phrase that you used in a conference recently, which is you talked about you don't need data perfection. You talked about how you need to understand what you have. And so my question to you is, how do you marry up the need for clean data with the drive for adopting innovation, and in particular AI, which requires data at its foundation in order to be effective? So how do you kind of move away from not being perfect, but wanting to use data to innovate and grow and do interesting things. What's the answer to that one?
Yeah, it's
sorry about that.
So we don't need data to perfection is a bit of a mantra of mine. Some people love it and some people hate it. But for me, it's really, I guess, a bit of a balance between realism and responsibility. So like I've said, we've got to understand the quality and limitations of our data and its uses. And that is especially true when we talk about AI. So it really points to some of the things I was just talking about. So from an office and a policing perspective, we've probably got, I guess, maybe two areas for this. So one is kind of continuously improving data quality. So saying that we don't need data perfection is not about giving up on data quality. Most certainly not. We definitely want to support forces through the governance mechanisms that we have and through our kind of work on national standards and data readiness to understand kind of whether their data is suitable for AI, where the improvements are needed so that they can make them, because everyone is, understandably buoyed by AI technology and what it can do for policing. There's some real benefits. And then I guess we kind of really want people to use AI responsibly with the data that we have, understanding that the data is not perfect. So it's really about, I guess, having really strong understanding of what those data gaps may be, kind of embedding that with some ethical guardrails, making sure humans are really firmly in the loop so that there's oversights throughout the process. And then really ensuring with those tools as well, particularly when it comes to AI and dealing with third-party suppliers, that policing maintains quite tight control over how and where that data is used. So it's also really important to kind of recognise that AI isn't a solution for every problem. People are excited about it, but there are loads of analytical tools out there, a lot of which that have been developed by policing for policing that offer real value and don't require advanced AI, but can improve the way that we police and the way that policing operates. So I guess what matters is if we're going to use AI in policing, we need to be transparent, we need to have that oversight, and we need to make sure that the technology supports and doesn't override that kind of professional judgment, keeping the human in the loop, making sure that it's explainable to the public.
Yes, that phrase human in the loop, I've heard that many times and it's good to hear it from you there. I'm interested in this idea that AI is not always the answer. And I wonder in policing, do you think there is, or maybe just in all sectors actually, is this sense of excitement? You want to just use this new technology, but it's not necessarily the right approach. How do you deal with that? To when people are coming to talk to you and your team, how do you kind of have that conversation with them to kind of decide actually it's not quite the answer? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I think it's common in every sector. And I think it's common with all new technology. I mean, AI has really captured people's imaginations, undoubtedly. And it's about having that kind of open conversation. So it's something that we're doing quite a lot at the moment in the office, talking to people, not just about AI, but talking to people about how having really well integrated data can give you better results from analytical tooling. So it really is about kind of going back to the data as the bedrock. Yes, the tooling's exciting and it can definitely improve policing and some of the elements of policing. But actually, that always needs to be rooted in what we know about the data, how relevant it is, and then what public value the tooling on top of that data adds. So I think it's very easy with things like AI to look solely at kind of productivity gains, but actually it's how those productivity gains translate into a better outcome for the public that's important for policing.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
I'm interested in police.ai. So this is about to be launched, I believe, in April under a different part of the MPCC. What will the relationship be between your team and what the AI people are doing over in this new organisation, which seems to have lots and lots of money?
Yeah, so kind of as you say, police.ai is not my kind of core area or core portfolio, but we are really closely aligned. So the National Data and Analytics Office and police.ai probably speak daily at the moment. And whenever the office is looking at any tooling that involves AI, it's obviously complying with the AI covenant that has come out of police.ai and the responsible AI checklist that they have. So we work really, really closely with them. And actually, part of that conversation is a discussion with them as to whether an AI tool is needed or a piece of, I guess, AI capability is needed, or whether actually something else will do that is far easier to explain to the public or to the criminal justice system as to how and why it's being used. So it's a real mix. And I can see the office and police.ai working really, really closely in the future as we go towards the National Police Service.
Yes, the National Police Service is not something we're going to see straight away, I think, though. So a little bit of time for that relationship to evolve and grow. Just interested to talk to you a little bit before I lose you about innovation and the way in which suppliers can engage with the work that you're doing at the centre level. So if we have organisations who are interested in engaging with police, whether they're very small startups who are just like a few people in a room to large organisations, what's the process by which they can find out what it is you're thinking about, how they can contribute, what are the problems you're trying to solve? What is the way in which suppliers can engage with your office?
Yeah, so there's various ways actually. So from an office perspective, I would say as a data and analytics office, we're looking for quite specific things. But in terms of the policing problem book, then the Office of the Police Chief Scientific Advisor, they have published a problem book. So suppliers can see what some of the policing issues are that we're trying to solve. And we work quite closely with that team as well as police.ai. You know, the three of us are kind of intrinsically linked in the policing ecosystem. So we talk a lot. But from an office perspective, I guess supplier engagement really focuses on ensuring that the technology that's being developed genuinely meets policing's kind of operational, ethical and kind of public legitimacy needs. So from an office perspective, we are always talking to suppliers and we're really interested in those small to medium-sized enterprises, as well as, you know, the kind of big companies that we all know exist around policing and government. But we talk to those suppliers quite a lot about how their products, I guess, exist in the world of standards, interoperability and ethical design. So the solutions that suppliers are coming up with have got to integrate with the policing data ecosystem and obviously meet those ethical and legal requirements that we've talked about. There's also a real kind of key need in policing to build things once and use many times. So actually, from a kind of national data and analytics office, we're looking for tooling that can be rolled out to everyone across the country in policing. So they should really kind of think about national scalability when they're looking at a product. And that doesn't mean a kind of a single vendor or a vendor locking scenario. It's about, for us, having multiple suppliers that bring to us what they do best and us being able to integrate that into our kind of policing ecosystem. But it's definitely not about having kind of bespoke tools for each force or for each crime type, which has sometimes occurred in the past. And then really it goes back to something I've talked about a lot today, but I'll mention it again anyway. So it's about transparency and explainability. So, you know, particularly when we talk about things that involve, I guess, tooling that involves algorithms and things like that, everything we do in policing has got to be auditable, it's got to be proportionate, and it's got to be transparent. So if suppliers can't demonstrate that to us, then that raises concerns because we need to be able to understand it well enough to be able to explain it, like I say, to the criminal justice system and to the public. But we're constantly looking to strengthen our collaboration with suppliers. You know, it's key to success and it's key as part of the National Policing Digital Strategy. that was released. So I've talked about the MPCC problem book. We've got partnerships with Tech UK in the office, and we're continually trying to find new ways to work with kind of academia and the third sector as well through initiatives like Women in Data. So making sure that we have representation in the sector, but also the policing academic centres of excellence that have recently been launched. So really making sure that public, private and the third sector and the academic sector are working together to kind of solve the policing problems that we know exist.
I really like the phrase data as a national strategic asset. It elevates the conversation to think of it in the language of the emergency services and resilience. There are massive risks from the misuse of data, as we've seen countless times with data breaches leading to fines from the Information Commissioner's Office. The role of leaders is key, from leaders of the future to those at the end of their careers. They should recognise data as a strategic asset. Some are deeply immersed, but others are building their confidence. Kate reminds us that data is foundational. It certainly is to the effective use of AI, and it's reassuring to hear that it doesn't have to be in perfect shape to be used well. Really interesting to hear about the National Data Analytics Office. My thanks to Kate for taking time to talk to me. That's it from me for now. Episodes of this series drop every Tuesday. All our podcast episodes are sponsored by MSA Safety, and we're so grateful to them for their support. Be sure to share, like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.